Hello, everybody. Thank you for being here. For those who are attending here at Ingraham and also on Zoom. We have our talk entitled Building Capacity in the Rehabilitation Sector of Belize, a shift from volunteerism to professionalism, given by Professor Jeff Hartman, who is an associate professor in the Doctor of Physical Therapy program and holds a joint appointment in the Department of Family Medicine and Community Health, as well as an instructional role in the University of Wisconsin Hospital and Clinic Orthopedic Residency Program. He also coordinates the domestic and international service learning from the program and advises the DPT MPH students. He has a clinic appointment and university health services. So please join me to welcome Dr. Hartman. We are very excited for our LACIS lunchtime lecture series to talk about a country that we rarely hear about, Belize. Thank you very much for being here.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the introduction. I think you can advance the next. Okay. Oh. That was kind of said, so I don't need to reiterate who I am. Next one here. So I'll just quickly say, so thank you for joining me today. It's an honor to be here speaking. I've never spoken here with LACIS, so it's a pleasure. And my plan today is to talk about disability and rehabilitation within the context of Belize, and to share a little bit about my my experience working within those sectors within Belize, and talk to you about some ongoing efforts to build and strengthen capacity within the rehabilitation sector in particular throughout the country of Belize. So that's my plan for today. And next. So I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but in case you forgot, it is a small little country that's often forgotten. Belize is just a small little country nestled in between Mexico and Guatemala. And it's a population of about 400 to 450,000 people, depending on what statistics you look at. And great diversity of cultural and ethnicity, diversity within Belize. And as you see too, within a span of 50 miles going east and west, you have the Caribbean on the east coast, and 50 miles to the west, you have the beautiful tropical rainforests and the Mayan ruins kind of nestled in between there. So it's a really amazing country in many, many ways. And it's been a lot of fun working down there over the years. So that's where we're going to go today. So disability, I'm going to give you a little context of kind of the magnitude and scale of disability here throughout the world and within Belize. So globally, as you see here, just the statistics, 1.3 billion people live with some sort of long-term disability, and that equates to about 16% of the population. And so it's a big problem, and some people consider it the world's largest minority, and it's also coined the missing billion, because a lot of these people kind of go unnoticed and they go underserved in a lot of ways. And so you can see from a global scale, it's a big problem. And they believe that number is rising for the reasons I stated on the slide here. Population is getting older in many communities around the world. There's a lot more chronic conditions that people are living with, motor vehicle collisions, surgeries, that type of stuff. People are unfortunately having complications from these things, and that number is growing. Thing I also want to mention, I highlighted at the bottom, that this number is only for people living with long-term disability, meaning they will have disability most likely for the rest of their life. This number doesn't account for the episodic, people with episodic episodes of pain, disability. So if you think about throwing out your back, or you have a surgery and it takes time to recover, those type of things, if you add those numbers to this, the scale would probably be doubled. So people living with pain, disability, a loss of function is pretty big in the world. And so there's a lot of need out there. When you come to Belize, unfortunately, we just don't really know what the scale is in Belize. So the Belize census in 2010 and 2022 put the rate of disability at about 8%. And any of us working in country know that number is very, very low from what it is. If you just take the WHO numbers of 15 to 16%, we know that this number is quite low. And the reasons for that is there's many theories on why that is, but the reality is there's no national registry in place within the health system or health documentation system. It's an underfunded national statistical institute. There's just not a lot of expertise or political will for really understanding this problem in Belize and really understanding what the magnitude is from a prevalence standpoint, as well as just what the impact is. What does disability cost not only the person living with disability, but the families, the community that they live in, and even the nation as a whole? What is both the prevalence of disability and the impact? And no one really knows that for Belize, unfortunately. And unfortunately, this is a common problem throughout the world. A lot of countries just don't prioritize disability within their health priorities. And it's really a big problem globally as well. And as most of us know, people with disabilities, they have less access to healthcare, education, and employment. And because of this, they're just at risk of falling into this disability. They call it a poverty cycle. People with disabilities are higher risk for living in impoverished conditions, and vice versa. People living in impoverished conditions are at risk for developing disabilities. And it's just this vicious cycle that people can fall into globally, but especially in low middle income countries. And it's just a big problem that not only impacts the person living with a disability, but like I said before, it impacts their family, their loved ones, and the community that they live within. And so it's a big problem affecting all of us. I won't go through this full timeline, but I put this together for another talk that I gave, kind of looking at the Belize government's investment in the disability community. Dating back to 2000, for many reasons, the Ministry of Health dismantled the Human Development's Disability Service section. So in other words, the national government kind of washed their hands of the disabled community. They stopped investing in that community for a number of reasons. One of the big reasons was they were looking to cut the budget, trying to reduce the budget. And one of the things that they recognized was, hey, there's a big kind of volunteer, non-governmental influence in our country, and they're doing a lot of good stuff for people with disabilities. Why don't we kind of let them take over, and maybe we'll even support a few of them financially, and we'll have them kind of address the needs for people living with disabilities. So they kind of were disincentivized in a lot of ways to invest. And so that was one area they felt like they could cut in the budget, was that disability services division. And you can see in 2004, there was a regional report, International Disability Rights regional report, that stated Belize is one of the least inclusive nations in the Americas with regards to disability. So after this dismantling in 2000, things just dramatically hit a low for that country in about 2004. And they've been trying to climb out of it ever since. There's been a few good things happening. In 2011, Belize did sign the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons Living with Disabilities, which is just a statement saying that we recognize you, we recognize the importance of providing for the rights and needs of people living with disabilities. But the reality was that was really just a signature. They didn't make systematic changes within the healthcare system. And so it just kind of remained on paper. A few other changes, at least in the right direction, started occurring after that. They recognized that there's not enough physiotherapists in Belize and other health professions. They actually started recognizing physical therapy as a profession. So things started to change, but it took 17 years for things really to be recognized. In 2024, we are excited to show that there was a disability that was just signed in the disability bill that was signed into law in December of 2024, which again is another important statement, but it's already almost the end of 2025. And we're still waiting to see what the fruit of this is. It's going to take time to recognize that. But on paper, at least, they say the government's going to provide protection from discrimination for people with disabilities, ensure accessibility, improve access to healthcare, employment, etc. So the government is saying we're going to do something about it. And they're even establishing a commission to oversee the implementation of all of this. But we're waiting to see it happen. But we're hopeful and we're optimistic that things will start changing in Belize in the near future. So this bill was just signed. The question is so until all that starts changing at the governmental level, what's happening for people with pain, injury, and disability in Belize? And that's where the rehabilitation part comes in. So just to make sure we're on the same page, when I talk about rehabilitation, I'm talking about physical therapy, occupational therapy, physiatry, which is physical medicine and rehabilitation, prosthetics and orthotics, rehab psychology, and speech language pathology. And so globally, there's a huge demand for rehabilitation. There's a really important study that came out and published in the Lancet that talked about 1 in every 3 people in the world needs rehabilitation at some point for some type of medical condition. And the other reality is that in low middle income countries, they average less than 10 skilled rehab practitioners per 1 million people in general. So this was a big study that just said, hey, this is an area that's not being met globally. We need to do more. And so WHO, the World Health Organization, they did make a huge statement in 2017 into 2018 saying, yeah, we're not doing enough and we need to do more. And so they created this call to action for all countries in the world to do more to improve access to rehabilitation in their country, in all countries or globally. And they created this Rehab 2030 call to action. And this was a huge deal because up until then, their rehabilitation and disability rights wasn't on the agenda within the WHO. You know, infectious disease and that type of stuff was the highest priority. And this was kind of always shoved aside. So for them to come out and acknowledge that things need to change was a huge deal. And they have a bunch of documents, a bunch of things kind of outlining how change can occur, how the evaluation process can occur in countries. And there's a lot of tools and resources out there for countries to take ownership and to make change. But momentum was started in 2017 and continues to this day, which is exciting. In 2020, I had the privilege of going down as a Fulbright scholar to Belize to do a workforce analysis in collaboration with the U.S. Embassy and the University of Belize. And I just went down to get a better understanding of what is happening in Belize with regards to rehabilitation. How many PTs are there? Where are they working? How much does it cost? How accessible is it? What are the barriers for access? Same thing with OT, same thing with speech, just to kind of map out what's being done in Belize. And we got a couple papers published from this, which was cool. But as you'll see from the results, now this was 5 years ago, but very little change has happened since, and I'll talk about that later. I found that there's no employed occupational therapists, no prosthetists, no orthotists, no physiatrists, and no speech language pathologists in the entire country, 450,000 people. There were around 18 physical therapists. I say formally trained because 17 of them had degrees, and one of them did not, but she was grandfathered in, and they allowed her to work with a license. So there's about 18 practicing physical therapists in the entire country. And in comparison, there's 412 medical doctors and 797 registered nurses throughout the country. So you can just see that the human resources specific to a rehabilitation is extremely low in 2020 and continues to this day. Of those 18, 10 of them were from Belize and 6 others, I'm trying to remember why I didn't include the other 2. 6 others were from different countries. I think the 2 others weren't practicing, that's what it was. They were licensed, but they weren't practicing, so I didn't include them in there. But there were 10 from Belize and 6 from different countries, all trained outside of Belize, because there's no training program for any of the rehabilitation professions in country. So you have to travel to Guatemala, Mexico, Cuba. Some were trained in Taiwan, Jamaica, Switzerland. So they all had to travel externally, which you can see is a huge barrier. Most of the physical therapists worked as their own private business. So they opened up a clinic and people would come to them, or they would go to people's houses. But they're all private practitioners, which means the cost was significant as a result of that. And at that time, there's only maybe one and a half working at the National Hospital as a physical therapist for the government. Everyone else was private practice. And so a lot of them worked their own practice, and all of them were primarily located in the densely populated areas, right? If you have to make money, you go where the people are. And so people living in the rural areas, which 60% of the people in Belize live in rural areas, they just didn't have good access. So because of cost, because of the distribution of therapists throughout the country, access was really challenging for most people. And task shifting, the idea of like nurses providing some rehabilitation services or technicians and that type of stuff, it's just not feasible right now, the way they utilize the other professionals. And they're so busy to begin with, and most of them are under-resourced as well. So the idea of training other medical providers to do rehabilitation, or at least some level of rehabilitation, just isn't feasible either. So there's really not a lot being done, unfortunately. So the needs aren't being met. So we know there's a high rate of disability and there's not enough rehabilitation access. So what's really happening? This is where the volunteerism comes into play. There's just been a long-term dependency on foreign intervention, really since 2000. The government has bilateral agreements with Cuba and Nigeria, where these countries will send medical brigades. So they're kind of like short-term medical teams that will go set up shop for a few weeks and just see patients. Or they'll actually send clinicians, and the government, the Belize government, will hire them for 1, 2, or 3 year contracts. And it's just a understanding that they pay both the individual and they also pay the country of Nigeria or Cuba to provide their therapists and even doctors and nurses, et cetera. It's just kind of an agreement that Belize has in place. And there's a heavy dependency on foreign volunteers throughout the entire medical system, but also especially in rehabilitation. So when I say foreign volunteers, I'm talking about short-term volunteers that come down for a week, 2 weeks, if we're lucky, a month. And there are some non-governmental organizations that will come to Belize and bring teams and do work and do all sorts of stuff. But it really is kind of, I call it the wild, wild west.
Mm-hmm.
I guess it doesn't really apply to this, but anything goes. The licensing and accreditation unit of the Ministry of Health is responsible for overseeing all the licensed professionals in country and monitoring all the volunteers that come into country. And I've gone through this process on a regular basis where it's a lot of paperwork to fill out. You have to get signatures, you gotta get permission, you gotta lay out your itinerary. It's a lot of hoops to jump through, and most volunteers just don't do it. And the licensing accreditation unit doesn't have the capacity to hold people accountable. And so people come in, kind of go wherever they want, do whatever they want, and it's kind of a mess in a lot of ways. And this type of stuff really leads to potentially bad things. And there's a couple studies here. One was done in the Lancet looking at medical students, residents, and licensed physicians. And this one was a study a colleague and I did looking at physical therapists from high-income countries that go to low middle-income countries to volunteer. And there's just at least 1 to 3, so 33 to 40% of those volunteers admitted to practicing outside their scope in some capacity. And the reasons for doing so run the gamut. And it doesn't sound like a big deal, but if you really think about it, like I wouldn't go to Minnesota. I wouldn't travel, 80 miles or whatever to go to Minnesota and practice. I can't do that. My license would get revoked. I can't go to Iowa and practice. So why do I think I can go to Belize and practice outside my scope? That mentality is a problem with that. And people don't always stop and think about, oh yeah, why do we get licensed? And why? So there's a lot of stuff happening within this volunteer industry. And there's research that shows there's a flawed assumption that these programs are beneficial and they're innocuous, and more research showing the potential to reinforce negative attitudes, disrupt community relations and dynamics, and provide inappropriate or poor quality of care. And I've given this similar type talk multiple times. So global health ethics is one of my areas of interest. I've done a lot of talks, and I have so many case examples of these organizations or volunteers that come in for short periods of time and they do more harm than good. And I have examples at the individual level, at the community level, and even at the national level. A lot of people in Belize would argue that this volunteer industry is what disincentivized the government, and that's why they dismantled the disability section of their Ministry of Health. And so there's undue consequences sometimes that you don't recognize that really can be problematic. And again, this is just a list of all the, look how there's so many references that look at the risks and the problems associated with volunteerism. Now, there could be another slide, and I have this slide, that talk about the benefits for the participants you know, especially students. Students get so much value out of these experiences, and there is a lot of positive stuff that happens. But there's a lot of risks as well. And if you don't go into it understanding the potential risks and pitfalls, you can really find yourself in some predicaments that you didn't expect, for sure. So all of this, fortunately, the Belize government, you know, they had a strategic plan on human resources for universal health. They acknowledged that this practice of volunteerism isn't sustainable. So at least they know it and recognize it. So that's a step in the right direction, right? But now what are we going to do about it? That's still to be determined. So kind of give you a context of the state of disability in Belize and kind of the rehabilitation sector in Belize. And now I'll share my experience trying to address some of these issues I just kind of laid out for you. And my journey, if you will, in Belize started back here at UW. So I was a practicing physical therapist for a number of years, and I went back to get a degree in public health. And my whole purpose was to learn more about global health and development, how to build and strengthen capacity within communities that just were under-resourced or had low human resources for specifically physical therapy, but healthcare in general. Excuse me. So I found myself in the inaugural class of MPH program here at UW, and also getting a global health certificate through the Global Health Institute at that time. Part of this program, that's good. Part of this program was to travel to do a fieldwork experience. And fortunately, I got connected with some leaders of the Hillside Clinic. Here's a picture of the Hillside Clinic, which is located in the Southern District of Belize. And they have it's run by a foundation out of Milwaukee, and they fund this clinic. And this clinic kind of has a dual purpose. One is to work, well, now I would say it's changed, but now it's to work alongside the Ministry of Health to provide for the healthcare needs of people living in the Toledo district. And they also have a training program for students. So they have medical students, pharmacy students, physical therapy students, nursing students, public health students, all coming down for month-long rotations. And so they have a kind of a dual mission of providing healthcare as well as training future global health practitioners. And they opened up around 2000, and they're still going strong today. So I got connected with them, and I went down to do a needs assessment to find out, and a kind of an asset mapping of the community to find out what the needs were for people living with disabilities, what was being done within the district, and how could Hillside fill in some of those gaps. And that's what I set out to do. And my work was funded by UNICEF, and it actually was funded also by LACIS through the NAVE travel scholarship. So kind of cool to now see the fruit of that support. But it was supported, and I had a great experience. And when I was done, I presented my report to the board of directors, and eventually was hired on to be the director of operations for the clinic. And that allowed me to really implement a rehabilitation program that I'll describe now. Oh, real quick. So I came in about 6 or 7 years into the existence of Hillside. And what I learned was Hillside was kind of a typical non-governmental organization where a bunch of volunteers from another country, typically a high-income country, had this passion and drive to come and provide for the healthcare needs for people living in Belize or whatever country. And basically what they do is they set up an American clinic right in the middle of Belize. And so they do things the way they would do back home. They stayed within their comfort zone. And they really just relied heavily on volunteers and medications from other countries, and just was inefficient on how they functioned and all that type of stuff. And I realized I can't come in here and start a rehabilitation program and just do what I would do in the States. It won't work. It's not effective. It's not efficient. And in fact, there's cultural clashes within Hillside and the Ministry of Health at that time. And so I really had to focus more on thinking about how to build or strengthen capacity and utilize the assets that existed in the district already, and just work with that to build this program. And so this idea of capacity building is really the mindset that I went in with, especially when I took over as the director of Hillside. I really tried to change a mindset and a culture, if you will. And so if you go to the next phase, go to the next one real quick. Now, okay, come on back. No. Are you able to do that?
Yes.
Sorry. Yeah, so to do that, so Hillside really functioned, they provide clinical care to people that came to them. And what the research showed, so WHO, the World Health Organization, has this idea of this community-based rehabilitation approach. Because a lot of the research showed, especially with rehabilitation, that if you just provide clinical care and you set up shop and you had people come to you, you really only reach 2% of the need that existed in some of these low middle income underserved communities. And so clinical care is just not efficient, and it's just not meeting the needs of people living with disabilities. This idea of community-based rehabilitation, the way I summarize at the bottom there is you're treating the patient. So you provide medical and care and rehabilitation, but you're also treating the community. And so you're looking at the community and trying to figure out what can be done to enhance and increase the ability of people with disabilities to get education, to go to school, to get jobs, and to participate at a social level to the maximum of their ability. So you're looking and trying to treat the community to provide for the social advancement in whatever way is unique to that community. You know, treating a patient, you know, they have a hamstring contracture, you pretty much do the same thing in Belize as I would do here in the States, as I would do in Switzerland or West Africa. But when it comes to community-based rehabilitation, each community is different. Each community has different systems in place that need to be addressed. And so you really have to understand the community, study the community, and know the community, and work with the community to implement this community-based approach to healthcare. So that's what we set out to do from a rehab standpoint with Hillside. And this is just the CBR framework. So they really look at these 5 different components. They look at the health of the person. They try to advance education, their livelihood, their social networking, and really empower them to do more. And so these are the different things that various community CBR programs will address, depending on the needs of their community and depending on the capacity of their organization. And then this was a slide I was going to have you find. You can see, so I did my needs assessment in 2006, took over as the director in 2007. But it wasn't really until 2010 that we were able to get our program up and running. Just because Hillside, I just felt like they really needed to change their perspective and get a larger community perspective. And we needed to have better relations with the Ministry of Health. We had to be viewed as partners rather than competitors. And so it took a few years to really create that culture. And fortunately, we were able to get there, and we were able to start a program in 2010. And so right now, so we started the program, we had a rehabilitation director, which unfortunately, and it continues to this day, is a foreign volunteer, a licensed physical therapist. We've had them from the United States, we've had them from Austria, we've had them from Sweden and Jamaica. Will come, they commit to Hillside for a year, at least a year, and they'll run the rehab program. And the reason why they're foreigners, because there's no trained physios in Belize that want to come and work in the Toledo district and work with an American NGO. I can go way into more depth with that, but it's just a hard job to recruit for. So we haven't had success. We rely on long-term volunteers. Then we have a rehabilitation technician who is Belizean, and she is someone that, yeah, I'll talk more about her later. And then we have students that rotate through on a monthly basis, and we have community partners as well. And we do clinical visits. So we do have patients come to us, but we also go to the homes and we go to the villages to provide both clinical care in the homes as well as community-based programming. And we also have a restorative program, which is what our technician runs. And what she does is patients that we've discharged, but still would benefit from continued exercise and programming, she works with them, in various capacities within the community. And so these are just some of the things that we've done. I won't go through all of them, but again, we do patient care, we do community wellness programs, we attend health fairs. We are starting to do community health worker trainings. So this idea of getting the community health workers out in rural villages to be screening for disability in kids is important. So we have early intervention. So there's some tools that they can easily implement to screen for disability. They even can do some basic kind of exercise instruction and kind of hold patients accountable for doing their work until the next time we return. And so we're really trying to get the community health workers to work alongside us and meet the needs, especially in those rural areas. This DAP it's a really cool program. It's called the Disability Awareness Program. And what happened was early on, so during my needs assessment, I met this nurse Fran, who was wonderful, and she had a child with special needs. And what she noticed was her child and other kids in a similar situation would go to school and the kids would treat them really poorly. And she didn't know what to do. So one day we were just talking about, man, that's just not right. And we just got to do something to kind of increase the awareness of disability with other kids. They call it desensitization. They need to desensitize the other kids to kids with disabilities. And she said, what if you brought some students down and went into the schools? And she goes, it's not ideal. You know, our teachers should be doing this, but the reality is they're not. And you guys would bring a lot of attention to this issue. And by you guys marching into the community, these schools, I think it would be pretty powerful to do that. And she goes, I don't want you doing this forever. But just to get us off the ground, come on down. So they helped us devise this curriculum that we would implement in the elementary schools, where basically the message was, a kid over there looks different than you, walks different than you, maybe talks different than you. They're just like you and me. And they have dreams and aspirations. They can be really smart as well. You know, you gotta treat them just like you treat your friends. And that was the key messaging. And a lot of success when we started implementing this. The teachers loved it. And the Ministry of Education has picked it up. And long story short, they started implementing it to all the schools within the district and have taken it now to other districts throughout the nation. And we worked ourselves out of a job. We ended up training the school teachers, and the Ministry of Health continued the training. And now the school teachers deliver this programming into the schools, which is really cool. And so that's probably one of our highlights of kind of, and I often use that example, like that's our goal, is to work ourselves out of a job. Like we shouldn't be dependent, or they shouldn't be dependent on us by any means. So, and we're doing other things within the empowerment, livelihood, and social sectors as well. This picture down here, so our patients that need like crutches or a wheelchair or a walker or a standing frame, instead of having that stuff shipped down from other countries or from the United States and eventually break down and get thrown in the trash, we have local craftsmen that we pay to build this stuff for us. So we're kind of improving the livelihood of some local men, as well as contributing to the economy. And really, if this thing breaks, these guys know how to fix it. And we're not dependent on that external stuff, which is really cool. So yeah, so now our goal is to treat that community first, then the patient, which is really a hard mindset because our comfort zone is treating patients here in the United States. And that's what we are confident in. That's what we are good at. This idea of a community first is a mindset shift. And so whenever we do have volunteers that come down, we have a conversation with them. Hey, listen, you can't function the way you do back home. This is different. Take the lead of Amira, our rehab tech. She knows how things work down here. Trust her, listen to her, take her suggestions, and let's treat the community first. We're trying to maximize our collaborations, because we can't meet all those 5 pillars of the matrix, right? We need other non-governmental organizations, nonprofit organizations, and even the government to address some of those other needs. And so we got to work together to address all those pillars. And our goal is to be Indigenous led. We want this to be a Belizean rehab program, but there's just so many barriers to that. And I could give a whole other talk on the challenges of, same thing with the medical clinic, with the clinic too. Like it's hard finding a Belizean physician, even though there's physicians in Belize, to get them to come work for us. We're not willing to outspend the Ministry of Health either. Like we don't want to steal physicians from the Ministry of Health either. Like we're working together here. But that's our ultimate goal, is to, because we recognize the limitations of us as foreigners coming in and providing a lot of the clinical care. But we really want to grow capacity, and the ultimate goal from the very beginning was to think not only at the district level, but national level as well. We've done some studies on our program, which has been great, kind of hold us accountable. And yeah, we think it's important to do that. And so kind of 20 years later, where are we now here? So I'll preface all this saying, this isn't all the Hillside Rehab program. Like I'll talk a little bit about that later, but the good news is, so in the past 20 years, Hillside continues to this day. They still have the rehab program. We have students coming down. We have a rehab technician, and we're doing some good work in that district. The Ministry of Health and Wellness, they are involved now with the community health worker training program that we've collaborated with. The Ministry of Education, I talked about that, the DAP program that they've taken over and run with. And there's just a lot of these nonprofit, non-governmental organizations that are doing good work in the district. So I feel like at the district level, things are much better than they were 20 years ago. Still work to do, but there's a lot of good stuff that's happened, which is fun to be able to see. At the national level, I think the same can be said. So when I first started, like I said, there's one physical therapist that was hired by the government to work at the national hospital. And now they have 2.5 physical therapists, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it's progress that the government funds and hires physical therapists to work at their national hospitals. The 2.5 is distributed by the Carl Huesner Hospital in Belize City, and then the Northern Regional Hospital has a physical therapist that they hired as well. And so that's encouraging to see. In general, the workforce, like I said, in 2020, there's about 18 physical therapists practicing. Now that number is estimated, you probably add about 10 more physios onto that. And I know of 4 students that are training currently in Mexico and Taiwan that intend to come back to Belize to work. So the hope is that workforce continues to grow like it has in the past 5 years that I know of, and especially over the past 20 years. The government they had a National Disability Conference in 2021, which was 4 years ago, but it was a huge deal at the time. The government recognized this as a problem. They wanted to convene all the players within the disability world in Belize as a huge success. And some nice things have come of that conference. And I caught wind that they're planning another one, but I just haven't heard the details yet. The government established a National Resource Center for Inclusive Education, which is really exciting. So a government-run inclusive education center, and basically that's tasked with training and empowering teachers in Belize to be able to address the needs of kids with both mental and physical disabilities, and that's a pretty well resourced and successful center that, again, that's government-run, which is really cool. My Fulbright work has gone a long ways to increasing awareness just from the issues that I'm presenting today, and kind of shining a light on where we're at with regards to rehabilitation. Also, what we've been able to do is, so I was able to meet all the physios in Belize, and the loudest thing I heard from everyone was, we need to come together. Like, I don't know what so-and-so's doing up north. I didn't even know so-and-so was working on the west side of the country. Like, it was just kind of, everyone was doing their own thing. So we were able to form, we call it the Belize Physiotherapy Association, unofficial BPA. And we have a WhatsApp group that we communicate on a regular basis. We meet on a quarterly basis to kind of update people on who's doing what and just kind of stay in touch. And our goal is to form a formal association recognized by the government here in the near future, which is really exciting. I mentioned the disability bill, which is exciting. And this last point, it's probably not gonna be surprising to you guys, but so this is the First Lady, Ms. Rosanna Briceño, and she's given me permission to share her story. But she had a foot injury that needed surgery. So she went back to Florida to have her orthopedic surgery. After surgery, she had her physical therapy for like 4 weeks or so, and was up moving around, doing pretty well, and decided to come back to Belize. She thought she'd get back to Belize, call up a physio, and continue what she was doing. Well, she couldn't find one. And she was appalled. Like, how can this be? How can we not have physical therapists in this country? We got to do something. So she reached out to me and a few other people and said, we got to meet. We got to talk. I'm like, really? But it hits close to home. Now we're going to talk about it. but that's the way the world. So we were able to meet with her and then the director of public health and wellness, director of hospital services and allied health, and other local leaders. And we sat down and they just wanted to hear from us. What's going on and what can the government do? And we were so excited, like, this is what we've dreamed of for 20 plus years. We're finally getting it. And we were able to share, and they were very open to our ideas and stuff like that. And they said, put a proposal together with a budget, submit it, and we'll see what there's any, what comes of it. And so we did. And so our initial conversations, do we aim low? Do we aim high? Like what's realistic? But we decided to shoot for the stars. And so we put together a budget that was close to $150,000 to $200,000 to really fund a well-structured governmental physiotherapy workforce, as well as kind of a community-based approach out in the rural areas. And we submitted that and it didn't get accepted, but we still took it as a success that we got an opportunity to present what's possible and how it could be done and what's needed. And we'll probably keep submitting that thing every year until it finally gets accepted. But it took the injury to the First Lady to really be like, what the heck's going on and what can we do? And we're hoping that leads to good things down the road here. And so lastly, at the regional level here, again, my data that I was able to provide it to Pan American Health Organization and this World Physiotherapy, they're kind of the world body for physical therapy. All the national associations are under this World Physiotherapy. And these two entities had no idea what was happening in Belize. They had no idea. And so my data has really helped work into their strategic planning at that regional level, which is really exciting. And again, the eyes are opened, which is a start, which is important. And CARICOM is kind of the organizing body within the Caribbean region, and they have physical therapy on their radar. They're looking to establish some sort of single registration of professions act where physical therapists could get licensed and move around the Caribbean without having to get re-licensed in each country, which is really cool. But they utilize some of my information and the papers that we produce to kind of plead their case to create something like this, and how it would help Belize, et cetera. So I always want to, I'm finishing up here. I want to share this that I recognize. So my position within all of this, when I went and did my needs assessment, I quickly realized that my job is to magnify the voice of the people in Belize. It's not my suggestions. It's like, what do the people living there with the disabilities, what are their family members, what are the other key players, what do they think is needed? And so I viewed that needs assessment as giving them a louder voice throughout the community. And now I'm just kind of along for the ride. So this next slide is just, I want to give recognition to, I mentioned me and my and I a lot today, but I recognize these are the people doing the work. I've complimented their amazing work in Belize over the years. And these are they're my mentors, they're my heroes, and they're really the ones that are the foundation of the rehab community in Belize. And they're just doing amazing work that I've been able to compliment and enhance in subtle ways. And so I just want to give them recognition and acknowledge that. Again, I said like my research, my work, my, but it's ours for sure. So I just wanted to state that. So last slide, in general, a lot of good stuff's happening in Belize. We're really excited. There's good momentum heading into the future, but we unfortunately still need volunteers. But we need to strengthen capacity at all levels, both at the community, district, and national levels. And it'll take grassroots and government involvement. And it really does take a community to do this. And that's what I'm going to do. So questions, anything on your mind? Hopefully I didn't talk too fast.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
So we have time for questions. Who wants to start?
Yeah.
I guess first of all, I wondered, and I'm sorry if you mentioned this already, but is there like a formal UW study abroad volunteer type of program already instituted?
The only ones I know, like through the medical school, like the medical professions, they have these trips that go. I know the PAs have a big group that go in May. My physical therapy students go. There's also the Hillside Clinic also has clinical rotations that medical students will go to, the students, et cetera. Other than that, I don't know of any formal program,
I
so.
just thought it might,
Yeah.
you know, there might be students in the room or that watched the video that might be like, oh, I'd love to participate, so
Yeah.
if that's the case, could someone just reach out to you? and-
Yeah, we could explore that for sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think you illuminated this at the end, but I just wondered how involved individuals who actually have the disabilities or have like historically how involved they were in developing the program itself, that these models that you're using, but then you kind of at the end really dove into it a little bit more, so that was.
Yeah, we could be much better. I think there's one picture of Rodney Borland, who's, he was a gunshot wound and had a spinal cord injury, waist down. And he's been heavily involved with a lot of this stuff.
Yeah,
But we could definitely do better at including and getting the louder voice from the disabled community for sure.
I mean, I just saw obviously some parallels to what you showed here too, like I'm not any sort of expert on this, but it's, you know, the funding that's being cut within our own country for services for people with disabilities, and I just wonder where we're headed when you showed was it 2000 or 2004?
2000, yeah.
Yeah, and then by 2004, things were looking like they were a bit in shambles, that we, you know, might be headed in that direction.
Yeah, yes. A lot of stuff, especially at the USAID level, hasn't directly affected Belize, but it's affected, there's some big projects
Yeah.
globally in Ukraine and some of the other countries that have really set the community back in a lot of ways, unfortunately. So the good news is Belize, well, the bad news is Belize is kind of, they don't receive a lot of the funding from those type of entities. That's the bad news. Good news is that doesn't affect them as
Yeah.
much. But yeah, no, you're right. The big thing is since COVID too, like not as many people are traveling, the volunteer sector's gotten smaller, and a lot of us feel like that's not a bad thing. So we tried to view COVID with a silver lining, especially even some global health stuff that's being done at the campus level. Like, what are we doing? Like, why are we doing it? How are we doing it? Should we be doing it? If so, how should we be doing it? Like, it really gave us pause and gave us opportunity to kind of reflect a bit and make some changes. So that was a silver lining in some regards.
I'm curious with what you said earlier about, you know, some issues that come when people are not licensed to work in Belize under the premise of they really need the help or they don't have the resources and they'll just go practice there. What do you see the balance between doing that for the obvious benefit of at least there's somebody there versus trying to enable and encourage people to grow it so that eventually that support isn't needed?
What's the balance?
Yeah. Or what do you feel like?
Yeah.
The way to get there?
Yeah, great question. The important thing is that you're going with an organization that knows the community well, and has key leadership within that organization are from that community, and they're directing things, and they're telling you what to do, where to go, how to work. You know, that type of leadership and organization is important to have. And then recognizing your limitations and recognizing what you can and can't do. And if you find yourself in a predicament, yeah, you need to ensure that you're not do more harm than good. And some of that isn't always recognized early on, but recognizing I could be is the first step. And relying on those local leaders and that type of stuff. No, they're not trained at the level we're trained, or trained in the way we are trained, but they're the experts for their people and their culture, their community. They know way more than we do. And relying on them and humbling yourself enough to do that is really, really important, valuable. I'm not saying, like, I had a nurse one time raise her hand. She goes, I was in a rural village in Belize one time, and I was a nursing student. She said, a lady was giving birth. What, am I supposed to step away and not help her because I'm not trained? No. but recognizing, should you have been in that situation in the first place? Should you have presented yourself as a medical provider, without any support around you? Those type of things is what you should be questioning. Like, should I, yeah. And the biggest, the study, the video of physical therapists that asked, like, why did you practice outside your scope? The biggest thing was, well, something's better than nothing. Well, is it? One. And who's deciding what that something is? And who's deciding if it is better or not? Who's making these decisions here? So, yeah, good question.
Mentioned that $200,000 budget proposal that you had made to the government. How much would that have increased the size of the rehabilitation workforce in Belize, and how many additional patients might have been addressed?
So what we did before that, great question. What we did before that was, so I went to all the physios that have their own practice. So all physios have their own practice. I'm like, if the government had a position that was salaried with benefits, would you take a position like that, or would you keep your own business? By far, most of them said, I would take the government job because it's secure, it's benefits, all that type of stuff. So I knew that the workforce existed in Belize to begin with. And so we wouldn't necessarily just redistribute the workforce. And the reality is most of them would work for the government, 9 to 5, and they'd go home and treat patients probably too in the evening. Some of them still, they work a lot. And so redistribute the workforce. How many patients it would see? We actually didn't do that calculation. That would have been interesting to estimate. I might have done it. No, I don't think I did. Know what I did do? I don't have numbers right off the top of my head. So what I was able to do, so I asked during my assessment, I was able to ask the physios, how much does it cost for a treatment, and how many patients are you seeing? So I kind of estimated how much income was being generated by this workforce of PT. So I had kind of an idea of how much they could generate for the government. So if you hired 5 people, that could generate X amount of income for the government. And I have those numbers, I just don't remember them off the top of my head. So yeah, sorry, I could get them if you really wanted them. Just send me an email.
I have a question here. And then
I was gonna ask, how long did it take you to establish this community relation? And
great question.
how did you navigate pushback prejudices in the community?
Man, great question. The most important question. So I was fortunate because I was able to go, the first time I went was as an MPH student. So I went for almost 4 months. And I just remember someone told me, when you go, just spend the first month listening. Just spend the first month getting to know people. And that's, so I'm glad I was given that advice from the very beginning, because I really went because they said, you're not going to get the information you want if you just jump right in and start work. They got to develop trust. Now they trust Hillside as an organization. They don't necessarily trust the volunteers as much as you think. It's better than other organizations, but you still really need to gain that. So it took a lot of time. For some people it would take a month. Other people, I was there for 4 months and didn't have it. So I think the other medical professionals, like Nurse Fran I was talking about, there are a couple others, I think we bonded pretty quickly because we had a lot in common just from our backgrounds and our careers and our passion to help people and all that type of stuff. So I think that was easier to navigate versus just some of the local community leaders and that type of stuff. I mean, yeah, they're used to people just kind of walking up to them and say, hey, I'm going to help you. So like, come on. So it took a while. And now I'm fortunate enough to be able to, when I approach someone, I can say, hey, I know Nurse Fran, I know, Ms. Joyce over the Inspiration Center, I know, honorary so-and-so, I know, and I've been working here for 20 years, and, that helps a lot. They're still a little skeptical, but it sure helps for sure. So it's a little bit easier to create those relationships, and the walls are torn down faster for sure.
There is a question here in the chat. Thank you so much for your talk. Just out of curiosity, as a volunteer, which is the most challenging situation you confronted in your stay in Belize?
Oh, I've had people tell me to leave, like, well, not in believe, I'm thinking some of my other volunteers. Well, I got one story. I got so many of them. I remember one time, this was in West Africa, so I'm gonna go a little bit, but
Mhm.
I was working for an organization. I'd been there for a couple months, and we had just helped this girl who had polio, and she had contractures, and we were able to surgically get them released and then splint her and help her walk again, like with a walker. Huge success story. So we go out to this rural village, and as we drive into it, there's this guy crawling on the ground, and I see he has polio. He's got these contractures. I'm thinking we could get him released, get him. So I run up to him. I'm like, and I don't know what I said, but I must have been talking 1,000 miles an hour, and I was just like, "Hey, sir, I got this." And he's like, "Wait, what's the problem?" And I stopped. He's like, "What's wrong with me?" And I'm like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "Oh, you're talking about my legs. You think there's something wrong with my legs, don't you?" And I'm still speechless. He's like, "You're with that organization. If you can give me a wheelchair, that'd be great. I'm a teacher at the local school. It takes me, 45 minutes to get into work and 45 minutes home. A wheelchair would give me an extra hour to my day. That'd be great." So I leave for 3 weeks. We come back with the wheelchair all fitted for him, and I go to deliver it to him. He came up to me and he's like, "What were you thinking that first day?" I'm like, I was speechless. Like, I mean, to me, it was just obvious that your legs were not working and you would be really happy if they could work and you could walk again. He's like, "I know. You made a lot of assumptions about me, didn't you?"
Mhm.
He's like, "Be careful. Your values aren't my values. You don't know what I want. You don't know what I need.
Wow.
Be careful." And that stuck with me for my whole
Mm.
career. And there's another guy too that I was worked with that same organization. He came up to me, he goes, "Jeff, you like to camp, don't you?" I camp. He goes, "What if you and I went out to the jungle tonight and camped, and you woke up in the middle of the night and you woke up and a snake was looking you right in the eyes, and you went like this." And he goes, "What would you do?" I'm like, "I don't know. I would freeze." He goes, "Yeah, and he'd bite you and you'd die." He goes, "He wouldn't bite me because I know what to do."
Mm.
And he goes, "You're smart. You're well-trained. You know a lot, but you don't know everything. We know a lot too. Pay attention." So those type of things, I have many of those stories that just kind of like, oh yeah. I must have been presenting myself in some way, some arrogant way, know-all way or whatever. And I made a lot of assumptions about people, that type of stuff. And it's like, those are the type of lessons that are hard to learn, but they're important to learn. Unfortunately, I learned them earlier in my career than at the end. And I've really tried to adapt and still make mistakes and stuff like that. But I do here in the States too. Like, I'll walk into a room and make assumptions as well. But those type of things are big lessons to learn. And I've had people tell, like, "We don't want you guys here because you're not going to come back. Like, you come in, you do your thing, you're all fans, all that stuff, and you never come back. Like, you don't really help us. Like, just we prefer you not to help us." It's like, wow, they've been burned fast and just stuff like that. So yeah, how we're perceived is probably not how you think we're being perceived in a lot of these places. And you just have to recognize that and do your best to develop those relationships, that trust, all that type of stuff. It takes time.
Uh,
The next slide has my email if anyone.
okay. Thank you for being here and hope to see you next week with the next stuff.
Yeah.
Oh.